All right, so let's talk about the deployment models. So there are four deployment models that we want to talk about: public cloud, private cloud, community cloud, and hybrid cloud. I would say practically public, private, and hybrid are the most common. Community clouds, I think in some cases still exist, and they make sense in some situations, but it's not something that you'll run into on a day-to-day basis with a lot of companies. But some do, some will have them. Okay, so what do we mean by public cloud? So we talked about cloud services as being, or cloud computing as being something where you're accessing services, storage, and data services over the internet. So public clouds are clouds that are available essentially to the public, to everybody. They're operated by cloud service providers, and anybody can go and access them. Anybody meaning, you have to get an account and you have to have users, you have to have credentials and all of that. But really, any company can go and make use of these public clouds. One of the properties, as I talked about, of any type of cloud, and especially a public cloud, is this property of multi-tenancy, right? You have multiple tenants in your cloud, multiple users, multiple companies, however you want to look at it. We call it tenancy. The multiple tenants in the cloud. Under no circumstances, because this would be the death of the cloud, can one user or one company or one tenant see the information of another tenant. So the environment is set up in such a way that there are these firewalls between each of these tenants, such that it's impossible for you to get access to another client's information or applications or environment from your account unless they explicitly approve it, but by default it's not allowed. Okay, and the common public cloud models are, the common public cloud companies are, for example, let's talk about the specific services here, but AWS, Google Cloud, Windows, Azure, and IBM. But those are all public clouds, right? And the services that you would run on them are, for example, the EC2 or the App Engine or what have you. Okay, private clouds, again, very common. And the private cloud sometimes is interchangeable with on-premises. Like it's sometimes sometimes these terms are used interchangeably. So when I say on-premises, often this is meant to some companies, it's in my building, it's in my server room. So I've got wires connected to a particular set of servers from every floor in that building, and that's kind of the traditional strict meaning of on-premises. But sometimes companies, when they say on-premises, they confuse it or they interchange it with the term private cloud. So as a company, I can put all my information in a data center, right? And I'm not accessing it through any sort of direct connection, but I'm accessing it through the internet. So as soon as I'm accessing it through the internet, then it becomes a private cloud. But like I said, some companies still call that as their on-premises deployment. But strictly speaking, once you start connecting over the internet to a data center, it's a cloud. And if that environment was built only and used only by my company or my organization, that's a private cloud, right? Multi-tenancy still exists in a private cloud. You might have different organizations or different divisions in your company that you're creating specific tenants for. Sometimes it's not as critical to ensure those firewalls are there for your these different tenants because it's the same organization, but they're often there anyway. But the biggest difference is not anybody can just connect to a private cloud. I can't just log into your company's cloud and connect to it. It's only people in that organization through some kind of credentials that are given to them are able to access it. Okay. And they're owned and operated by your own organization, by your own IT team within your company. Okay, so you lose some of the benefits of the cloud that we were talking about before, in that you're still responsible for procuring the hardware. You're still responsible for securing that private cloud. You're still responsible for a lot of it. So although it's still a cloud, and because you're managing it and maintaining it, it's losing a lot of the advantages that the public cloud has to offer, but it's one more deployment model. All right, so let's get to the hybrid clouds, right? We were talking about hybrid cars a little bit earlier. Hybrid clouds essentially is a combination of public and private clouds. So I would say the majority of companies that I have worked for use hybrid clouds. They have their own cloud, their private cloud, and then they want to start moving into AWS. And why are they going to keep things in their own cloud? Sometimes they fear that they're not going to get the right performance, security, whatever. Typically those fears are not founded. The performance and the security and all of that you get out of AWS and some of these other clouds is better, is as good, if not better, than what you're going to get through your private cloud. Sometimes it's because they have legacy applications, right? Somebody was asking about COBOL and AS4 and these mainframes. Well, to move those types of environment, to move those kinds of workloads into a public cloud is sometimes a bit of an effort, and you don't want to risk it. Right? It's possible, but you have to jump through hoops. You don't want to risk breaking that application. You don't really have a lot of developers, or it was developed so long ago you don't even know who developed it. So these workloads are kept in their private cloud. So they're going to have their private cloud for these kinds of workloads, and they're going to have their private public cloud for other kinds of workloads. In other cases, some people might use hybrid clouds for disaster recovery, right? So let's say I have, and we've done this. My company has done this for a university, for a couple of universities down in the south of the U.S., like in Florida and Louisiana, because they had been hit by the hurricane, and then they lost their service, their applications for a long time. So what we did is they have their private cloud and it's running in their private cloud, but we set up a mirrored environment in AWS. And now the next time, anytime a hurricane hits and their environment goes down, there's a process, and somebody was asking what DevOps engineers do. Well, that whole process of flipping over from the primary to the secondary was something that a DevOps engineer had to do. But there's a process that they go and it will literally switch from the private to the public cloud. And in the meantime, all the data and all the information is being replicated from one to the other. So hybrid clouds are really important. Most companies, like I said, operate in a hybrid model. And the things you have to think about in hybrid models are, first of all, performance, right? Because sometimes you've got some information in the public cloud and some information in the some in the private, some in the public, and there has to be traffic and movement of information from one to the other. And so the connection between your private data center and your and AWS is critical. And AWS offers something called a direct connect, which offers a 1 gigabit or 10 gigabit connection to your private data center. And we typically recommend to all our customers that those are absolutely critical if you're going to do any sort of migrations or if you're going to move into AWS, because inevitably you're going to need communication from one to the other, or even while you're migrating, you still have data in your private cloud while your application is in your public cloud. So performance is one thing. The other thing is security, because it might be that users have access to an application in your public cloud. Those routes, the network routes back to your private cloud have to exist for that communication to happen. But that also means it opens up loopholes for people to potentially access your on-premises data center through AWS. So you have to make sure that you take into account performance in terms of connectivity, but as well, look after security and make sure that all of the security is nailed down, so unauthorized users can access unauthorized or can access resources that they're not authorized to access. Okay, so hybrid just means I'm using a little bit of private, a little bit of public, and it's the thing you're going to see the most. All right, so the last deployment model we're going to talk about is a community cloud. So community cloud, I would think of the nearest thing to compare it to is the private cloud. The only difference between the private cloud and the community cloud is that in the community cloud, you have multiple organizations that are somehow related to each other. So it's a little bit loose definition, but let's say, for example, like the slide is talking about, government, right? So if the government said, okay, we're going to set up our own cloud, and Department of Defense is going to use it, and Department of Homeland Security is going to use it, and some other Department of Labor is going to use it. You can think of that as a community cloud, right? The data all belongs to the government, to the U.S. government, but different divisions are using that cloud. And there might be other examples. So let's say, for example, you have a company that has a cloud, a private cloud, and they acquire multiple companies, or they're built based on different divisions or different operating divisions, different operating units, and they have their own private cloud. You can think of that as a community cloud. So somehow somehow these organizations are related, so they're familiar with each other. So there's some kind of it's kind of okay if they were in the same data center, and that would be considered a community cloud.